Sandy Phippen will introduce this evening's performers, but first he will tell you a bit about Ruth Moore herself and to set the stage for you to hear her work. But how does one introduce Sandy? Most of you probably know Sandy. He is an exception in many ways. One exception, and I'm not sure how true this is, but I put some numbers and dates together from his book, and it looks like he's the only true Mainer who was born in White Plains, New York. I think he was just there for a few seconds. Coincidentally, perhaps, at the same time Sandy was born, I think that Ruth Moore was working for Reader's Digest and living in White Plains, New York. So, Sandy goes back a long way with Ruth Moore in his professional and personal friendship. Sandy teaches at Orono High School. He is what you would call very busy. In addition to teaching, he writes, produces videos, plays, radio series, and even a cartoon. He has published in Pucker Brush Review, New York Times, the Bangor Daily News, Ellsworth American, and many others. He serves as a consultant and a literary reviewer. His best-known publications include The Police Know Everything, The Best Maine Stories, Cheap Gossip, The Letters from Liverpool, and People Trying to Be Good. Because of his work and research with Ruth Moore's writing, he was a consultant for the Abbey's exhibit, The Indian Shell Heap. He has reviewed Ruth's works. He has taught her novels and her poetry. And his most recent publication, High Clouds Soaring, Storms Driving Low, The Letters of Ruth Moore, is, other than talking to Esther, Ruth's sister, probably one of the best ways to learn about Ruth herself. I'm very pleased to introduce Sanford Phippen.
Thank you, Diane. I should have checked what she was going to say. How do you be a native and born in White Plains, New York? Well, it's an embarrassing story, but it's a Maine story. I was a war baby of World War II, and thankfully my mother's not here tonight, and she was on the run, shall we say, without benefit of being married. So she went to White Plains, and there I was born. And then when I brought it up just recently, in fact, about her going down, bring me back to Maine on the train, incidentally, to Ellsworth, I said, what was that like? And she said, well, it was the hottest day of the summer, and you messed your pants right there on the train. That was my coming to Maine, my first memories of Maine. Anyway, I have a slight problem tonight because we do have a tight schedule, and I've been going around talking about Ruth and the book I edited all over the place, but I have like an hour program. I'm cutting it down to 10 minutes if I can. We are here, as Diane told you, to celebrate both the excellent work of the Abbey Museum and of the great writer Ruth Moore, and I mean great, too. While Ruth was an amateur archaeologist of Native American artifacts, she was an outstanding professional archaeologist of the human condition, heart and soul. Make no mistake, Ruth dug it up right. And I'm so glad she did. While everyone who comes here knows how beautiful and haunting the scenery is, and that's what they write about mostly, only a very few writers from this area have really captured the life of the people who first settled here. She lived the life and she loved the life. I think Diane told you that Ruth grew up on Gotts Island, was born on Gotts Island, near where the Ruth Moore dig is now. But like so many of us natives, she had to go away to get a decent perspective on the place and to become, I guess, an artist, you might say. Ruth knew about the hardness and toughness of life here, as well as its wonderfulness. There certainly was a richness in the local life, which is not in the books by people who didn't grow up here. She knew what it was like to grow up on an island, of course, to be a fisherman's daughter, and to be totally self-sufficient in those days, and at the mercy of the elements. I think maybe that's one reason why Ruth loves storms so. She loves storms, earthquakes, hurricanes. It's throughout her book. She writes about that all the time. I've known about Ruth's work since I was a little kid, growing up across the bay in Hancock, reading her books for reports in school. I remember all the excitement in the late 1940s when Deep Waters, the movie based on Spoonhandle, was shown in Ellsworth. Everybody went. They really did, and discussed it, and we're all excited about it. The only thing we have equivalent to that today, of course, is Stephen King. Ruth is not, and speaking of Stephen King, Ruth is not a genre writer. She hated genre writing, I think. She's a real writer, where the plot is real life, and the narrator is an extension of the author's personality. And what a personality Ruth had. What a sharp mind, great sense of humor, great eye she was blessed with. It was really my pleasure. I didn't realize it, I guess, at the time, to get to know Ruth personally. I thought the way she was with me was the way she was with everybody, that she welcomed everybody into her house, which of course was not true. I value that now, certainly. When I got a chance to edit the letters from Gary Lawless, Ruth's paperback publisher, I thought, well, how can I do this? I had 17 letters that she'd sent me over the years. That's what I began with. And I started collecting them from various people that I knew she'd written to and advertising it a little bit in the Ellsworth American. And I finally ended up with 350. But Ruth was a very private person. She destroyed most of her private letters. So it made it very hard, since many of the letters were to editors and they were business letters and so on. I thought, oh, great, this is not going to work. But as time went on, with help from her family and with help from friends and so on, we put together most of the 350 letters in the book. And what I want to do tonight briefly is just read parts of some of the letters and talk about her prose, because Jackson and Dennis are going to do the poetry and the ballads as only they can. So let me begin with that. I'm not sure how much to piece in about Ruth's life. She left here when she was 13. Left the island anyway, Gotts Island, did not come to Mount Desert. She went to Ellsworth, where she went to high school, and she boarded there with relatives, and she'd go back to the island in the summertime. Thanks to a summer lady on Gotts Island, she went to Albany, New York, to the State University of Albany, where she got her degree in English. She had planned to be a teacher, just like I did, like so many of us did. Growing up around here, being a teacher was a good job. There was security, and it seemed like a permanent position. Any kind of year-round job was a good job, actually. But she found out in 1 year at Central Islip High School on Long Island that she hated teaching, and then moved into New York City, and where she lived in Greenwich Village and worked as a secretary for various people. And if you read the letters, you'll have all the crazy adventures that she had, because we have those letters, thankfully, from the 30s. The letters we don't have, alas, are the ones from the 20s, when she was away at school writing home here to Maine. Anyway, let me begin. I'm just going to do a few highlights so you get the idea of her work. I want to start with a description of the winter, because you should read Ruth Moore for her descriptions, for her dialogue, for her wonderful characterization, and also, when I think about it, if you really want to understand this area and how the natives lived for about 100 years, I'm talking about probably Civil War to 1970 or so, approximately, that period, Ruth got it right. It's wonderful. It's like going back to my grandmother's kitchen, and anybody else who grew up around here, that's what it was like. The people, the way they talked, the way they acted, the way they interacted with each other, and the way the summer people were dealt with, and so on and so forth. Both Ruth's family and my family, and almost every native family I know of around here, have people who went to sea, and of course we're fishermen and so on. Anyway, this is how Ruth, here we are at a high summer on Mount Desert Island, and this is Ruth describing coldest winter. And the title of the book, of course, is High Clouds Soaring, Storms Driving Low. That's not my title, that's Ruth's title. That comes from this passage. Winter in a northern seacoast land is interlude. Day after day, in the changing weather, high clouds soaring, storms driving low, the land huddles into itself. Salt water curdles into slush against the shore, then slowly into grainy, pale green ice, fissured by tides and flung in crumpled blocks up and down the beaches. The spruces crack and snap on a windless evening and let go their loads of snow, so that a woodlot in the cold seems to be talking to itself in a language of small stirrings, whispers, and sighs. There's nothing people can do with land like that, bitten 4 feet deep with frost, secret and uncommunicative under snow. Winter is a time of gear overhauling in the fish houses, snug with fires built in oil drum stoves, of building traps and painting buoys, of mending the dragnet that the shark tore through. The shark himself is keen in the memory, and the gaping hole he made is here and now. But the warm weather, the summertime, lost in the blizzard that drives the small drift under the windowsill, is as unreal as a ghost until it comes again. The talk above the tapping hammers is gusty and loud, but to a man going home to supper, walking through the snowy twilight is like walking through a dream, and the house looming in blown whiteness is a house of sleep. Winter is the time of woodcutting, the hollow thung of the axes like bells among tree boles, the clean track of the wood sled and the brown dung of the horses in the snow, the frosty maple butt flying apart on the chopping block at a touch of the axe. In the early mornings, blue with snow and coming light, the deer comes to the orchard, digging with her cold hoofs for the frozen virid apples, and in the time after the gear is overhauled and the wood is cut and the boat is painted, content comes out or loneliness bites deep, depending on whether people are content or lonely. I don't think anyone's written about winter in Maine any better than Ruth Moore. Now, to change the subject totally, she went off to California at one point and worked for Alice Tisdale Hobart, who was a popular author back in the 30s and 40s, and she ran a walnut ranch and had some wonderful experiences. These letters of the 30s, I hope people in California learn about, because it's some of the best writing about California that I've ever read. And here's Ruth's description of an earthquake. Like I said before, she loved disaster. And here was her first earthquake. Well, we had an earthquake out here. I hope the newspapers back east didn't spread it all over the front page and scare you to death. This is a letter to her mother, incidentally. I thought of sending you a telegram to say that I was all right, just in case they'd put out scareheads about it. But then I thought probably they wouldn't, as it didn't do much damage here, and that's what makes them spill over on the ink. It happened about 2:30 in the morning. I was sleeping down in my apartment that night. This is in Berkeley. Sometimes when Mr. and Mrs. Hobart are both away, I stay at 834 Euclid, but Sunday night I was at home. I woke up with a funny feeling of things moving and stuck my head out of the blankets just in time to see the stove do a nosedive into the middle of the floor, and all the stovepipe came down on top of it. At the same time, a heavy, full-length looking glass that the landlord lent me fell into the bathtub. It made an awful noise. I thought to myself, well, I certainly am having a lordly nightmare. It must be that canned salmon I had for supper. And I hope to God I'm asleep. But then the little table beside my bed apparently walked under its own power out into the middle of the room and fell over. And I was awake enough by then to realize that the room was going up and down like a boat, and that something very, very peculiar was going on. So I bounced out of bed and found I had to go to the toilet very bad, and just made it. But Marm, she called her mother Marm, don't ever sit on the john during an earthquake. For it is a very, very horrible sensation. While I was sitting there with the thing going up and down under me, it struck me funny, for I thought how I must look. And when I got through laughing, everything was as quiet as it must have been before I woke up. I went out on the sun porch, and it was as pretty a night as you ever saw. Great big stars and a little bit of a moon just coming up in the east. I thought to myself, I guess I was asleep after all. But no, there was the stove turned bottom up and all the furniture a ski whiff. And then all along the hill back of the house, lights began to come on in the houses, and people began to talk in very high voices. And the funniest thing of all up and down the hill back of my house and in front of it, you could hear one toilet flushing after another, where people had to go and go quick. It was about the stillest night I ever saw, and noises carried. I heard a man in a kind of astonished voice say, "My God, Annie, I've pissed all over the mattress." I know who he was, as his house is just across the street from mine, and I've seen him going out and in. He's a professor of philosophy down at the University of California. Boy, would I love to ask him one of these days if he got his mattress dried out yet. She's also good. I skipped the part that I usually do on Prohibition, because these letters start in 1930, and there's a very funny part about a boat going ashore in Winter Harbor. and all the liquor bottles being picked up by the locals and so on. Here's Ruth later. This is much later, 1957 now, skipping ahead. In 1946, it was her second book, Spoon Handle, which became so successful that she was able to quit having regular jobs. So she didn't have to work the Reader's Digest anymore, and she came home to Maine and was able to buy 23 acres in Bass Harbor, which was then called McKinley. This is a letter to New York City to Dorothy Lebrano Guth, who was E.B. White's goddaughter, and her father was Gus Lebrano, who helped start the New Yorker magazine. And Dorothy just retired from the New Yorker. She helped me a lot with this book, incidentally. And she calls her Dottie, and this is about, some of the letters to Dottie are the best ones because they're personal, like I was saying. And here's her experience being on the jury duty in Ellsworth. She said, I got stuck with jury duty and been pining away the days in the county courthouse. Just in case you wondered, we were up there quite a while and tried one case, the consensus being that attorneys and criminals took one look at the jury, decided they were a bunch of tough old cookies, and preferred to have the cases referred by the judge. I learned some fascinating new card games, made $70, and met Mrs. Mace, who runs a sporting goods store up on the airline in Aurora. She wears wonderful hats. When the judge complimented the jury on its impeccable conduct of our one case and referred to us as men and women of affairs, Mrs. Mace remarked with some asperity that according to the looks of that judge, he's had considerable more affairs than any of us has had. And then later she goes on to talk about, this is when she's remodeling the house. She and her friend Eleanor built the house down in Bass Harbor that's still there. She said, we've been remodeling the hen house, which is to be a workroom, and I spent the day on the roof laying roofing paper and tarring it. The tar pot I had was too small for the size of the brush I had, so I had to use a rag. Spreading tar with a rag takes training and skill, of which I have neither. So most of the tar was on me. Turpentine takes it off. Lard takes off the turpentine. So far, I've not discovered anything that takes off the lard. And then there's, the letters are full of stuff like this, just like all her novels are, too. Here's the part about when she first was, I want to read when she first started her literary career. She started early on, the 1920s, of course, writing poetry. Like all writers, she wanted to be a poet. And she talks about getting her first rejection here. She said, I recall in my 20s when in a brash moment I submitted a full manuscript for a book of poems to Scribner's and got back all of it with a rejection slip and the reader's comment inadvertently, I hope, enclosed with it. This poet is like a young pumpkin in the field, lightly touched with frost. God damn it, at least she called me a poet. And then later, this is to Dottie Guth again, too, here. She talks about something that happened out here, supposedly down on the island. They were, let's see where it is. Oh, Winter again, back to Winter. Winter's with us, nice, we miss you. And then she goes on, she says, and this reminds me of old George Kelly, who at 90 was living off in the woods by himself and got snowbound in a bad storm and wasn't heard from for 3 weeks until the selectmen of the town waded in through 6 feet of snow to check on him. There was his house, no tracks around the door, no smoke coming out of the chimney, no response to knocks, and the door locked on the inside. I guess, the first selectman said, that old George is a goner. We better break down the door. Well, now, the second said, I know George pretty well. Let's just walk back into the trees a piece and then come back. So they did, and sure enough, there was a note pinned to the door panel. I am in here, and I am all right, or I would be if you lazy bastards would plow the goddamn road. And so Ruth ends the letter saying, so okay, sweetie, love Ruth. I guess, there's so much more, and I feel sad about leaving it all out. Ruth lived a long life, thank God, and she knew so many people around here. When I did the letters, I was amazed at the references, not just to my own family and relatives and people in Hancock that I've known all my life, but all around the area. She knew everybody. And she left us an absolutely wonderful and very valuable resource. I tried, I thought I'd do bits of the novels, but I've got so many notes, even from my writing, my teaching especially, that I didn't know what to pick. I thought I was going to do this scene from the man out on the boat in the Seaflower novel that I like very much, and I thought I'd do something on the way she described this fight between these people, and just the kitchen, her mother's kitchen, and so on. There's so much in her, even though there are only the 13 novels and the 3 books of poetry. Gary's going to try to bring out another one soon, and the book of letters. It's enough. It's enough for really a course in this area, in Maine itself, actually. Well, without further ado, that's my introduction to Ruth, and now I've got to introduce entertainer number 1. Entertainer number 1 is Dennis Damon. And I want you to pay attention, especially tonight, people who don't know Maine very well especially, and listen to Dennis talking. He's not Tim Sample, and he's not putting on an accent. This is the real accent. And when Dennis first made the acquaintance, I don't know if he's probably going to tell some of this too. We haven't rehearsed or anything, so maybe he is going to say this himself. When he first got to know Ruth, after she heard him do one of her ballads, she thought, wow, that's right. You did it just right. I forgot to say, in fact, at the end of her life in the 1980s, she was like reborn with what I'd call the Sons of Ruth. Gordon Bach really came first because he loved her ballads and recorded them and brought out the book again, had it reprinted, which is still available tonight in the where we got the books for sale. And then after Gordon, along came me, I guess, and working in Ellsworth in the newspaper in 1975. Gordon was about 72, and then Gary comes along, discovers the books, from Belfast, and then Jackson comes here, Jackson Gilman, to the College of the Atlantic, and there's a whole bunch of us, young men then anyway, now middle-aged, but we all fell in love with Ruth. And it was like she was, her whole life was reborn, her career and everything, through us. Anyway, Dennis, whom you're just about to meet in just a minute, I'm hurrying, Dennis, is a man who wears many hats. Many of you may know him, of course, as the proprietor of the Mount Desert Spring Water Company. I wasn't surprised to hear they were one of our sponsors. He also runs a company called GC Property Management. And Dennis is a native of Northeast Harbor. He grew up on the other side of the island from Ruth. He was the son of Dot and Lou Damon, and I've heard stories about them for years. I thought Lou was the captain of the Sunbeam. He was not. Dennis just told me he was the engineer of the Sunbeam. But anyway, Dennis comes by his heritage. You can understand why he loves Ruth. He comes from Maine seafaring and fishing people. He himself has been lobstering, been fishing. His mother used to cook for the summer people. They were sea dogs, you might say, in the best sense of the term. Dennis is also now a politician. Before that, he taught at Orono High School before I did, and ended his teaching career at MDI. He's been a coach. He like so many Maine natives of this area, you have many different jobs. And as I said, he's now a Hancock County Commissioner. And without further ado, I give you Dennis Damon.
Charlie had a herring ware. It was down to Bailey's bite. He got up to tend it in the middle of the night. It was late October, midnight, black as tar, and nothing out the window but a big cold star. House was like a cemetery. Kitchen fire was dead. I'm damn good mind, says Charlie, to go right back to bed. But a man who runs a herring ware, even on the side, is nothing but a slave to the goddamn tide. Well, a man feels meager and a man feels old in that pitch-black midnight, lonesome and cold, with chills in his stomach like 40,000 mice, and the very buttons on his pants like little lumps of ice. Times he gets to feeling it's no damn use. So Charlie had a pitcher full in his orange juice. Then he felt better than he had before, so he had another pitcher full, just to last him to the shore. Well, down by the beach rocks, underneath a tree, Charlie saw something that he never thought he'd see. For sparkling in the lantern light as he went to pass was 3 big diamonds in the frosty grass. Says Charlie. Diamonds? Where'd they come from? I think I'll pick 'em up later on. Howard wanted some. Then he hauled in his dory, and She felt light as air. And in the dark midnight, Charlie rode off to tend the weir. Well, out by the weir gate, Charlie found an old sea serpent swimming round and round. Had a head like a washtub and whiskers like thatch, and a breath like the flame on a Portland star match. Black in the lantern light up he rose with a great big barnacle on the end of his nose, and he looked Charlie over, kind of surly and cross, and said,
"That fish you got shut up in there belongs to my boss."
"Fish? In there? Why, I ain't caught a fish since I built the damn weir."
"Well, nevertheless, there's 10,000 bushels in a rough guess."
Charlie moved his lantern, and he gave his oars a pull, and he saw that the weir was right brimming belly full. There was fish rising out of the water, 1,000,000,000,000 at a time, and the side of each and every one was like a silver dime.
"Well, what you gonna do? They're uncomfortable, they don't belong to you, so open this contraption up and let them go. Come on, shake the lid out. The boss says so."
"Oh, he does," says Charlie. "Well, who the hell is he? Thinks he can sit back and send word to me." Sea serpent swiveled, made a water spout.
"Keep on, brother, and you'll find out."
"Well, you're nothing but a lie, so old your hoary. So get your dirty whiskers off the gunnel of my dory." Sea serpent twizzled, and he heaved underneath, and he skun back a set of sharp yellow teeth, and he came at Charlie with a gurgly,
"Ah!"
and Charlie let him have it with a port side oar. Right on the noggin. Oh, 'twas a hell of a knock. And the old sea serpent, he sank like a rock. "So go on back," yells Charlie. "Tell that old jerk not to send a boy to do a man's work." Then, over by the weir gate, kind of tinkly and clear, a pretty little voice said,
"You, Charlie dear."
"Now what?" says Charlie. "This ain't funny." And the same sweet voice said,
"You, Charlie honey."
and there on a seine pole, right in the weir, was a little green mermaid combing out her hair. "All right, I see you, and I know who you come from, too." So he let fly his bailing scoop, and it landed with a clunk. And when the water'd settled, why, the mermaid, she'd sunk. Then the ocean moved behind him with a mighty heave and a hiss, and a thundery, rumbly voice remarked,
"I'm goddamn sick of this."
Up come an old man, white from top to toe, whiter than the daisy fields, whiter than the snow, carrying a pitchfork with 3 tines on it, muttering in his whiskers and mattering on it.
"My sea serpent is so lame that he can hardly stir. And my best mermaid, you raised a lump on her, and you've been pretty saucy calling me a jerk. So now the old man has come to do a man's work."
"Well," says Charlie, "why don't you just leave me be? 'Cause you may be the hoary old man of the sea, but I got a run of fish here shut up inside, and if you keep on friggin' round, you're gonna make me lose this tide." Next thing that Charlie knew, he was lying on the sand. The painter of his dory was right beside his hand, and he could see out across the bay, and it was all calm and still and wide. And it was full daylight, and it was high tide. "Oh," says Charlie. "What am I about?" The oars weren't wet, so he hadn't been out. "Oh," he thought, Diamonds. Underneath the tree. Seems to me I found some. I guess I better go and see. But he couldn't find any. Not one gem. You see, there was only 3 little owl dungs with frost on them. Ruth had obviously a way of creating a story and being able to bring it to life and to tell it. But she also had in a humorous way, and a lot of her endings are, you have to listen for them. I guess they're soft. They're understated, certainly. But she also had a way of portraying the past, and as I've said before, that's one of the things that spoke to me when Ruth spoke to me. This next ballad is entitled The Ballad of Skipper McBride. And not only does it document perhaps what people did on the coast 100 years ago or 150 years ago, but it also gives you a little hint into her respect for the Native American, the Indian, those people who worked hard, European, those people who wanted to live with the land and not to own it. There's a very small passage in here that perhaps you'll get that. Skipper McBride. Down on the clam flats of Burnt Point Cove, the hull of an old vessel lies rotted away. There's not much left of her, some limp and slimy slats that the tide runs over every day. But you can see her ghost if you know how to guess, and you can trace the outline of a long, shallow dip, covered half with mussel beds and mud cove mess, where lie the last leftover signs of a century's dead ship. No, she was no clipper on the China run. She was a working coaster, plugging up and down with cargoes of everything under the sun, hauling back supplies and goods to a shipbuilding town. She was a mystery, at one with mud and silt, and after 200 years of time and creeping tide, she left behind her history and the way she was built, written down by her builder, Skipper McBride. Papers, thin and tattered, in an old sea chest, tell she was the Mary Ann, named for Skip's wife. And list his hand-picked lumber. He used what woods were best to build a vessel tough enough to last a man's life. Skip didn't buy lumber. His woodlot was the reason. First, he cut down and sawed his white oak trees. For white oak, air-dried, might take a year to season. He had time then to ransack the swamps for hackmatack knees. White pine mass, 2 sticks, sized and dressed, smooth as the skin on Mary Ann's back. Yellow birch for underwater always works the best, that never would rot, that no jolt could crack. Skip wrote about a tree just right for what he needed. But under it, he found, hidden in the pucker brush, an old campsite with a lot of Indian arrowheads scattered on the ground. Signs of an Indian tribe drove off and gone. I'll let the undergrowth have it. Keep it where it be. He walked out around it, and then he moved on. Be damned if I'll use that one. It wa'n't a lucky tree. He carried his own lucky piece. It was a gray, dark fossil stone. The sailor he bought it from didn't want to let it go. Said it meant long sailing for any man to own. The little critter in it lived 1,000,000 years ago. Skip wrote about the sailor. Likely he lied so as he could put the price up, make me think 'twas right. But that talk about 1,000,000 years kind of stirred me up inside. I asked him what the critter was, and he said an ammonite. I asked him where he come from. Said he was a Greek. Well, damn furriner or nothing, I paid his price in gold. For that little curled-up critter done everything but speak. It said luck and long life and old, old, old. Somewhere offshore in the tricky Gulf of Maine, buried deep or water-worn, however drowned men go, are the bones of Skip McBride, lost in the hurricane called in the records then the century's worst blow. It smashed up the Mary Ann, left her a wreck, drove her towards the coastline before the mighty blast, and Skip and 2 sailors washed off her deck trying to cut rigging from a floating mast. 2 weeks later, the mate and 3 men sailed her home on jury rig, a hope and a prayer. She was too racked out to go to sea again, so they ground her on Burnt Point Flats and they left her there. They brought ashore her logbook along with Skip's chest. It turned up in someone's attic about 50 years ago. And Skip's last entry was, "The weather's turning west. Come on, you goddamn Ammonite, it's time for you to show." The mate wrote up the logbook, a few short notes that told about the hurricane and how Skip died, and about sailing home with their hearts in their throats and the vessel half sinking on each change of wind and tide. Skip McBride's lucky piece that told him what would be doesn't speak of luck now in tomorrow's unknown. It says only lost, forgotten, gone in the sea, the curled up fossil in its nest of dark stone. The Ballad of 3 Green Waves. No, I ain't got no dory, mate. You see, I goes by myself alone. I can't stand nobody gomming around anything's my own. I ain't married and I never will. I comes when I likes and I goes. Oh, folks and fussin's all very well for them that likes 'em so, but when I puts out to haul my traps in a good rip-staving sea, there ain't a soul on the face of this earth worrying after me. There was my brother, years ago. Got him a wife and a kid. He worried and wore himself plumb out, being easy in what he did. I remember we was hauling traps outside one time. Come on, a howling blow. Cold as a dog and the wind northeast and thick and tie with snow. Them was the days that we worked with sails. You see, there weren't no engines then. I had a peapod and steered with an oar. That wasn't enough for Hen. Oh, he had a dory rigged up with a mast and a mainsail without no jib, so's he could set in the stern and steer with that tiller hugged in his rib. Well, the wind was coming, and Hen shoots up, one eye on the line of foam. "Jack!" he yells. "What in hell I do? I've left my compass to home." Thinks I to myself, you goddamn fool, you're all rigged up like a blooming yacht. You been so blasted careful? Well, I hove him mine. "Catch!" I says, and he caught. Hen wasn't no good when it come to fog, and snow squalls thicker than sin. But I never seen the rampaging yet that I could lose my bearings in. Oh, down she come. She was a bitch. And I squat on the end of my oar, and I headed into her just hard as I could and let her roar. I wasn't troubled. What'd I care? I never had no wife. And as for dying, well, there's them that's troubled all their lives. "Holler, you damned old slut," I says. "Holler and bust your lungs. And if I get scared of your goings-on," says I, "may I be hung." Then I sung all the hymn tunes that I ever knowed, because them's the kind you can roar. Never did hear a word I sung, but my throat got kind of sore. I looks behind, and I sees 3 green waves following fast as sin, each of them reaching his whiskers out to grab and rousel me in. Thinks I to myself, if them catches me, glory, amen, amen. This fish will have a good feed tonight. Revive us again, again. First one was dark and deep, smooth as a coffee cup. Next one was a slash of foam, like a kettle boiling up. But that last one, he was the whole green sea. He had a wicked eye and slobbering jaws, He's the one's longing for me, thinks I. So I spits out over the peapod stern and turns my back on the sea, and in a minute I feels the rise of that first one under me. Oh, that first one lifted us up and up, soft as a sea of oil. The next one bit at me going by, and I could see its innards boil. 6 fathom deep in the trough he made, I looks through that glass green sea, clear as a bell through that last wave as was towering over me. And then the bare black bottom spread beneath for miles and miles around, and school on school of big sea fish looked up without a sound. Their eyes were buttons off dead men's coats, all shiny, and cold, and still. And the first time ever in all my life, I felt my innards chill. For whilst I was looking, down come Hen, sunk like a chunk of lead. Oh, he was as large as life and as natural. Only I seen that he was dead. Them big sea fish, they swayed aside with a little swirl and a swish, and then I never see Hen no more. Only the tops to them fish. And the snakeweeds waving up and down. Their ends all crimped and curled. You know, the trough between 2 big he waves, it's the stillest place in the world. And foam was in my mouth like hair, and howling in my ears. I swum the middle of that there wave for 100,000 years. I bumped my head on the back shore beach, spewed up like a goddamn pill. That old wave went reeling back, laughing fit to kill. Well, a dory's made to stand the seas of most any kind of a gale. All that we ever found to Hen was top to his dinner pail. I maintained then, and I maintain now, that Hen would have saved his life. His mind had been on steering his boat instead of on his wife. Oh, if anything ever come to me, says Hen, what'd my poor wife do? I never cared a hoot in hell, by gory, and I come through. No, so when I goes alone. Through fire and water and paint. I ain't got a soul to worry about me. I don't care if I ain't. This is, if you can ever find this is Times Web, another book of Ruth's poetry, yet certainly not as popular, I guess, as Cold as a Dog, but still very nice. And in it, we found what turns out to be the signature piece for the exhibit at the Abbey. And it's entitled The Indian Shell Heap. Diane invited me out to Gott's Island 2 years ago to observe the field school and to watch the dig. And I guess there was an ulterior motive. She wanted me to tell some of Ruth's stories, and why would you pass up that kind of a chance? But I was fascinated by the science, I think, of the dig. And at that time, there was quite a stir, I can remember, in the first supper that we had out in one of the houses, because there were bones that were being exhumed. And at that particular point, we didn't know, or they didn't know, whether or not those bones were from animal or from human. And so there was a quandary as to what to do, and should they have been from human. They tended not to be, turned out not to be human remains, but in fact the remains of an Indian dog. And it becomes quite prophetic when you listen to the words of Ruth. In the bright light of morning, the island lies still, Around the shore, the salt whisper of tide, and over it, the sky. Old thorn trees on the bank slant north and east, blown that way by generations of southwest winds. Their leaves have a tough and northward growing green, and one has a thorn on which a shrike once pinned a sparrow. Now, dried by sea winds, bleached by summer suns, the delicate small bones hang loose, about to fall. Let once the wind lean out a little more, they'll blow away like straw, or the thorn will go. The thorn is worn, sandpapered down to a thread by the slight swinging bones of the sparrow. This field was hayfield once. This turf, 10 inches thick, grew grass as high as a man, from roots deep down in lime, so they said. Old neighbor Welch's cows, they said, gave cream, and his boys fed on it, and they grew 7 feet tall. He plowed the turf up once and planted garden sass and had to haul the squashes home by ox team one at a time. But that's all legend now. The white man's town is gone from here. His houses down or open to the sky, his kitchen stove to rain. In the barns that were fat and crammed and bulging, sweet-smelling to the peaks, swallows fly in and out where windows were. Batten is gone from board, board from rafter. Cracks here that a coon could walk through if there were any reason now for coons to come. Old neighbor and his sons sleep round the clock. Who never in gone time did such a thing, never, when the foreshore field was full of hay to cut. Dig in the foundations, lifting fallen rafters. There you'll find his tools. Old iron. Here's one for saving iron. Here on an island, you couldn't run to a store, even if you had the cash to do it. Couldn't run to a blacksmith shop when something cracked or wore. You fixed it up yourself. Old neighbor made the things he used. Could make a broad axe and adze, horseshoes and horseshoe nails. Dig here. The shelf in the barn where he kept the broad axe has left its shape on the earth. Rectangular, reddish. To show this soft stuff once was wood, and ants live under it. But here's the broad axe where it dropped when the shelf fell down under an old horse collar and some rusty rings, and a pile of square-cut nails and what's left of the adze. And 2 sickle blades, plainly marked, each with the nickname of a 7-foot son. Because the boys, Hiram and Byron, fought over whose tools were whose. They had, it was said, some legendary fights until the old man got enough of it. He went to the barn and tore the iron shoe off an old wheel, beat out 2 blades at the forge and stamped one H-I and one B-Y, and swore that he'd use one on the nose of the first boy who yipped over tools from then on out. These are the blades. You can still make out the letters, high and by. The hay in the field is only knee-high now. It's had competition. Thorn trees grow here, the tough, spiked bush that loves a shell mound. Pink wild roses, rattlebox on a fat root, daisy, and devil's paintbrush. Trash growth that in the gone time would have been whacked off by high and by before their seeds grew big enough to know they were in a hayfield. Growth known as sour, whose roots nevertheless like lime. For under 10 inches of turf, the shells lie heaped. Clamshell and moonshell, winkle and scallop and snail, together with the bones of the great auk, the gray seal, and the Indian dog, whose types died out of the world who knows how long ago. 10 inches at 100 years an inch of slow-dying, slow-dropping grass roots cover them. 1,000 years of southwest winds and black northeasters, stars and sunrises, green spring and snow. Since the old neighbor of his tribe split out his bone marrow and dropped his hammerstone by the fire pit and went to sleep in the sun. So slowly, carefully dig, marking off the horizons to the glacial clay left when the ice went over, layer of ash, pearl gray, mixed with the black of charcoal, burned stones around the fire pit, which was his kitchen stove. In many years, the rain's been dripping into it. Layer of beach gravel, his boys lugged up from the shore and dumped over the shells when they got high in the sun and stank so that a man couldn't sleep for the smell of them. Shells, ash, charcoal, and overall, 1,000 years of turf. Here by the fire pit, you'll find his tools, lost in the ashes, kicked aside by a careless foot, buried up while the old man slept. Did he beat up the boys when he couldn't find this blade, give them sore tails, and kick the kitchen pot? At least, here is the blade in the ashes and the shards of the pot. It's a knife blade, carefully chipped from fellsite, gray-green, tough stone, triangularly shaped. The chips are tiny. The artist who split them off knew how to work the stone's conchoidal fracture so, with nothing but a bone or a beaver's tooth or a chisel from antler. Not like a forge or a set of steel dies without a micrometer. It must have taken whoever did it a long time. Well, old neighbor, we've found it for you. We'll put it on a shelf that we have to keep, along with the other artifacts we have, High's sickle and Bai's sickle, and a Dresden cup, and the sparrow's clean, bleached bones. It may be that we'll confuse the archaeologists who come to dig for keepsakes from a gone time under the red-brown rectangle of our shelf. They'll think that old neighbor had a Dresden cup, and that High and Bai and I all cut our hair with sickles. Thank you.
What Dennis Damon is to spring water, Jackson Gilman is to cider. And that was Jackson's cider we had tonight for refreshments. Gilman, and I've got in my notes here, what a great name for a man who tells fish stories. Gilman. He bills himself, as you probably all know, as the stand-up chameleon, and is appearing regularly this summer on Thursdays at the Acadia Repertory Theater in Solmesville. That's his family show, and he performs, I think now in August, I forgot to check this with him, at the Music Ark in Bar Harbor on 8 o'clock on Wednesdays. Jackson has been here in Maine, though, since 1972, when he became a member of the first graduating class of the College of the Atlantic. In those days, he was into agriculture, and I read in my research that he's a professional arborist, which means I guess he can set up an arbor. Any place? Anytime. Anyway, instead of agriculture, though, he went off into showbiz, and he combined forces with Tony Montanaro, that many of you may know as the Mime in Portland, and began performing about 20 years ago, leading to becoming one of the singing waiters at the Deck House first in 1978. And he's done all kinds of shows. He's done evenings with Rudyard Kipling's stories, which is sort of like what he does with Ruth's stories. He's worked at coffee houses and cabarets in Boston and Cambridge and other places in the country. Jackson's a clown. I've seen him do that. I've seen him do lots of different shows. A dancer, a storyteller. And as a professional chameleon, as you'll probably see tonight certainly, he's been in the past a lobsterman. I've never seen him do this. He does an act now with a lobster trap rap, it's called. He also does, in contrast to that, a Yiddish grandma telling fairy tales. I guess, yes, Yiddish grandmas would do that. He plays a politician, a maestro. He's apt to be most anything. But in 1987, he brought out a tape. I don't know if it's on a CD, but it's still on tape. I've seen it in Mr. Paperback and other bookstores. It's called Down East Ballads by Ruth Moore and others, and there are a lot of Ruth's ballads on that tape. And Jackson, just like Dennis and me, knew Ruth personally, too, And you know, the point is, of course, he calls himself a chameleon. Well, of course, Ruth was too. I think all fine artists have to be chameleons, naturally. In the summertime, Jackson lives here on the island at Somesville, and in the winters, he lives in Portland. Jackson's been called a zany kind of comic mutant, and he's a masterly storyteller. So here, without further ado, is Jackson Gilman with his interpretations of Mount Desert's master storyteller, Jackson.
This next ballad I'm going to do for you is a true story. It's about a fellow who we'll call Sam. It took place around World War II when people were watching the waters around here to make sure that no vessels weren't lurking around that didn't belong here. And the Sam, of course, his name has been changed to protect the humbled vigilante. And you'll understand why when you hear Old Sam. Where's Old Sam? He saw the German submarine riz up black on a moonlit night. Cussed thing comes sneaking right by him. Made a hissing, pooping sound. Never showed a light. Well, everyone them days kept a lookout on the water. World War II had only just begun. The Coast Guard said, you see anything, you come get us, running. Most people took care, but Sam took his gun. Clouds were in the sky, driving from the west. The moon was dodging in and out. It made it hard to tell. It was dark where the shadows was, bright in the moon path, and Sam thought later on he couldn't see too well. But there the thing went. It swole out like a rooster. You think the hens was watching, the more puffed out he growed. Kept heading up the bay towards Fox's Narrows to do what devilish actions only God knowed. Well, Sam got mad when he thought about it, and the more he thought about it, the madder he got. Them son of a whores will ruin Vinyl Haven. What they need is a good charge of buckshot. Oh, Sam had a trawl line half out of water. No fish to speak of. It was the wrong time of tide. He didn't think no longer. There was no time to speed thinking. He grabbed hold of the tub and hove it overside. First time he fired, couldn't say he hit it. Thing kept rambling, not even fast. Sam put down his shotgun, started up his engine, edged a little closer, and give another blast. Ha! Sam hollered. How you like them apples? This time, bullseye, right in the red. The thing went down like a busted iron's hogshead. I sunk you, by God, Sam said. Daylight was coming. Flood tide making. Clouds from the westward were cooking up a squall. Couldn't say he cared for the look of that weather. Oh, I better quit pooping around here and hunt for that trawl. And then he saw the black thing back on top of the water, not very far away, and Sam turned tail. Wasn't no submarine, German or otherwise. What he'd shot at was a damned great whale. Well, Sam took off like a gun-scared sheldrake, throttle wide open, couldn't even pay. His old powerboat walked on the water, just touched whitecaps most of the way. Someone asked him,
What's your hurry? Where's the fire? Who was dead?
oh, there's a whale there in the bay. Might have got nosy. Them things is dangerous. That's what Sam said. Where's old Sam now? He's still living. He's 87. Don't seem to fail. He's a wild talker. He tells a good story. But he never says nothing about that whale. I appreciate what Dennis was saying earlier about Ruth's soft endings. That's how he described it. It was a good, clever way to describe that. Sometimes they're downright, leave you hanging right up there, like the suspended endings. They're not typical. Sometimes when you're reading, you know it's the end because you turn the page and there's a new story. But when you listen to them, it's like, is that the end? So the end of this story, this next one that we'll be doing, is the end of the story. And I'm going to ask Dennis to come back out here and narrate this, the beginning of this for me, and we'll do this one bit together. And this is the ballad. What is this one?
Willie.
Oh, yeah.
The Ballad of Willie. Down by the sand beach, looking for an oar, I met my brother Willie wading in to shore. You're all wet, Willie. There's rockweed in your hair. There's sand in your pockets. What's it doing there? Willie said, knocking clam flats off his shoe,
I just come back from being drowned, if it's anything to you.
well, it ain't really, I said, but hell, fact is, Willie, you don't look well. I thought my brother Willie was drunken a skunk, so I said kind of careful, you been on a drunk? Willie looked ugly, and then he said,
Yes, half seas over would cover it, I guess.
well, come home, come on, come get dry. But Willie looked seaward, and then he hove a long sigh.
I come down from Cargill's bow last night,
Said he.
thinking of what lady would ever marry me. I have had from many, many a caress. From Moll and Paul and Mary, Margaret and Tess, and Sue and Joe and Helen and Annie and Alma and Annie.
Yes, I know all about them. I know all about them.
Well, I always thought that I was pretty clever. Out here last night, the moon shone bright. It looked like forever. The waves was running up the sand in little fins of foam, and I thought I'll walk the beach a while, and then I will go home. But as I walked, I saw out there what seemed to be a head. A head and shoulders floating. It was right out there.
He said. I see his finger pointing, his hand all bloodless and white, wrinkled up and parboiled like it'd soaked all night. Was somebody drowned, Willie? What was it that you spied? Whose body was it floating in the cold night tide?
It wasn't no one's body.
Willie said to me.
It was the damnedest, prettiest girl I ever hoped to see. Floating down the moon path, all ringed around with foam and not a stitch of clothing on, as if she was to home. And as I watched, she waved a hand, turned herself about, says, if you want me, you've got to come in, for I ain't gonna come out.
Willie, I cried, you're crazy. And Willie looked at me.
I put one foot off the beach into that white foam. The first foot I put in the sea, felt a cold wind blow. The next foot I put in the sea, I knew I was gonna go. And when I put my buddy in, I saw the moon path wide break to a million diamonds that tinkled down the tide. And then I saw her swirl and dive. Her bright and gleaming head was lost in foam and moonshine.
And I think she laughed.
He said. Willie! I said, Willie! And Willie looked at me.
I've swum all night. I've drowned. I've vanished in the sea. I've seen 100,000 wrecks. I've seen the pirates' gold. I've seen 1,000,000 dead men's bones. Above all, I've been sold.
But didn't you see the girl? Not anywheres? Not all night? For that ain't like you, Willie.
All right, all right. I've seen too many women. The tall, the thin, the fat. She had a fish's fins and a tail. Who wants that?
He shook the sand out of his shoes and the rockweed off his head.
I'm done and done forever. The foam's my home.
He said. Willie, I said. And Willie, like you said, are you dead?
When I was doing this process of recording, I would bring the rough drafts to Ruth for her final say. And it was really fun working with her that way in collaboration. And she was very particular about the interpretations of her ballads, and I was very glad to get them the way she wanted. This next one that I'm going to do is one that she sent me back in the studio for. Wanted to get the interpretation just right. It's from the voice of Ike's wife, Tryphosa's. And it was a tricky one to really capture what she was trying to get. And finally, she was pleased with this rendition. It's the ballad of Tryphosa's husband. And it's in her voice. He wasn't old, and his health was good. He had no call to go and get queer. There couldn't have been a better place for him to be than right out here. His folks was fishermen, born and bred, and it never seemed so hard to me that a man who was all but born in a boat should make his living out of the sea. But every winter when work was slack, and he ought to have been out fixing his traps and boat, he'd sit there with a seed book under his nose till I could have jumped right down his throat. And before the frost was out in the spring, he'd be digging down on his knees. Ike, I says, it's a fool thing. You can't grow nothing on rocks like these. Even the trees is sprattled out because the roots hit rock and won't go down. There ain't much use in gadding truck where goosegrass even in June goes brown. But he never give no heed to me. He was setting his ways as a hen. God never meant this place to grow, and so I told him over and again. But every spring for 20 years, he dug like he had a kind of craze. Why, the money he spent on seeds and stuff would have kept him in oil pants all his days. Last year, he got him some good black earth, dug up from some famine on the land, and he would have liked to have lugged himself to death, spreading it down to the rocks by hand. And all his seeds come up and growed. Green as stuff you'd raise in a can. Why, Ike was as proud as a pint of milk. I never see such a change in a man. I done my damnedest. Ike, I says, the weather's brewing, and don't you forget, we'll have a tempest before we're through. We ain't had a season without one yet. But he was a stepping clean off ground, and he never could see behind in his nose. I got it licked this year, he says. Down under the rock, the root grows. It come in August. The sun rose red as a kilt pig for a couple days. The gulls flew up, made a touse, and took for land. And there, I says, well, we ain't had a storm like that for years. It's a wonder I'm here to tell the tale, for I thought the lighthouse was pounding down, the sea made so and blew such a gale. I went to bed, but I never slept. 4 windows blew in the eastern rooms, and in the morning, the rocks were swept like the angels of God had been there with brooms. Like he opened the kitchen door and stood there mumbling under his breath. Look, I says, there's mess enough without you acting like we'd had death. Over and over again I've said that it won't grow, that it ain't God's will. Why, he spun around like a crazy man and said, God Almighty says, keep still. You and God is done. I've stood this wrangle until I'm a wreck. Blast you, blast God, blast the sea. Shut up or I'll break your goddamn neck. Well, then he scrabbled some seeds in an old tin pail with nary another word for me. I thought he was going out like he did to heave rocks and cuss at the sea. So I says, if you're going out in this, you better put on your hat and coat. But he slammed the door. The next thing I knew, I heard the engine start in his boat. When my hat came up, I run up the stairs and pointed the spyglass over the trees, and there was his boat right off the land. It was horrid the way she clumb them seas. The waves was just rolling over the bow, and there stood Ike, his pail in his hand, right in the face and eyes of God. Sowing seeds, like you do on land. I'll never forget till my dying day, till they lay me out in my winding sheet. Ike, a-planting seeds in the bay with his boat sinking underneath his feet. I figured to go into shore this fall. It's kind of lonesome now living alone. I could have felt he was nearby if he'd been buried underneath a stone. But my brother died, and he left me a fam. The letter said there were some hens and a cow, and I can raise garden truck to sell, and I'll manage to survive somehow. Well, it's tough to try and grow a fam here on the rock-bound coast of Maine, as was witnessed in that story. You'd think it'd be easier to make a living from the sea, but that's a tough way to make a living too, as a lot of people here know. It's especially tough if the fisherman in question ain't too sharp. And old Randall, he weren't too sharp. There's a lot of expressions, you know, about someone who ain't playing with a full deck, you know. You probably heard them. You know, if Randall had both oars in the water, they were probably in different ponds. They have a lot of colorful ways to say it here on the island, you know, with a big mammalian genetics laboratory here. They say, well, he comes from the shallow end of the gene pool. His feet ain't even getting wet. There's a lot of different ways to explain it, you know. Randall, he weren't tied up to the dock too tight. In Maine, a common way to express that is to say, he's numb as a hake. Now, I do this for, you know, people, tourists from away, they don't understand what I'm saying. Numb as a hake. I explain to them that a hake's a fish. And if you can't figure out what being numb as a hake is, then so are you. They catch on. But all of these descriptions are a good way to describe old Randall, because he was all of these things and less. If you get my drift. And here's
the story of the had luck of old Randall. Old Randall was a fisherman who couldn't make a cent. His gear would break, his warps would pad, his fish hooks all get bent. The crabs and the haw's eggs ate his bait before the lobsters could, no matter where he set his traps. It never was no good. Go home, old Randall, and set your traps no more. The amber leaves of autumn are falling on the shore. Oh, soon will come the snow squalls and nights without a star. And if you fish in winter, you'll be worse off, and yeah. I might need help with that, Pat, too. You'll be worse off, and yeah. Well, Randall kept on going out. And on one sunny day, he found a blob of greasy stuff floating around the bay. He said,
Well, I found some ambergris. Sure smells awful strong.
but it was nothing but an old cow moose that had drifted round too long. Go home, old Randall, this luck is not for you. There are no silver quarters here or pennies for your shoe. This is an old dead animal, I'll come floating from afar, and if you don't heave it overboard, you'll be worse off, and yeah. Well, he could not patch his rubber boots. His wife, she had no dress, and all they ate was mush and greens to fill their emptiness. But Randall kept on fishing. Each day found him outside, till his poor wife could take no more. She starved to death and died. Stay home, old Randall. She's got no other kin to wrap a towel around her head and underneath her chin. The neighbors, they'll come looking, they'll gather near and far, and if you leave her lying there, you'll be worse off, and yeah. Well, that day, he caught a halibut. It was as big as a packing space. And when he hauled it up to look, it had his old wife's face. When he put a hand to her to hook it up and bent, the damn thing bit his finger off. Turned round and went. Go home, old Randall. Don't carry on this way. The icy tides of winter are roaring up the bay. The sea is loud and lonesome. It's heaving on the bar. And if you keep on wearing out, you'll be worse off, and yeah. Well, Randall went another time. And on that last black day, a pirate ship sailed around the point, heading up the bay. His sails were red as dogfish blood. His flag was mean and bold. But Randall said, well, this is my chance. He's gonna deep with gold. Go home, old Randall. Don't grunge yourself no more. The amber lights of sunset are lit along the shore. Oh, soon will come the darkness, the night without a star. And if you chase down Captain Kidd, you'll be worse off, and yeah. But Randall piled the power on. His engine smoked and strained. He chased all night till morning light and saw that he had gained. Old Captain Kidd come out on deck. He wore a dreadful frown, and he cried, run out the cannon and mow old Randall down. Go home, old Randall. Go where you belong to be. The amber lights of sunrise are shining on the sea. Old Captain Kidd's a marksman. He sights you from afar, and if you catch his cannonball, you'll be worse off, and yeah. Old Randall, he caught the cannonball. Felt the awful shock, flew 10 feet up in the air and sunk down like a rock. Down in the kelp, the crabs creeped out and waved their claws, and his last words bubbled upwards.
Well, I ain't no worse off than I was.
So we'll wrap up here with one last ballad. And this is another one that was parceled out to me under the table, so to speak, and now is in the tired old apple tree. And it's about Finley. And in it, they talk about a funny cloud. Well, I'm going to have to explain that a little bit, but we're going to have Dennis come out here to help with the end of this story. And I'll explain about this funny cloud. It's actually a colloquialism for the word funnel cloud, which you can imagine is a name for a tornado. Now, you don't get them too often up here, but evidently one did hit Finley. It was quite an experience for him. And so this is Finley and the funny cloud. The day the sky turned wrong side out and the funny cloud come down, old Finley, he was hauling trawl out on the Abner ground. Forenoon had been peculiar, muggy, hot, and mean. Sometimes the sky was green and black, sometimes black and green. Well, thunder showers, Finley thought, they don't bother me at all, but still, I'll be glad to put for home as soon as I haul this trawl. Then all to once it looked to be that the funny cloud come poking down like some great cooter's snout. By golly, that's a funny cloud a-walking on the scene. If I ain't mistaken, she's heading straight for me. And then his old sloop, the Betsy Ann, rolled over like a cup, turned completely upside down, and come back right side up. Well, she was a good old bism, took more than that to kill her, and there she was on top again with him still at the tiller. And everything just as it was. Kidboard still half filled, bait barrel hadn't moved an inch, not a herring spilled. The only thing, his trawl ground line was wrapped up in the mast. Well, I'll be dang, said Finley. That happened some old fast. By God, I don't believe it. I must have had a fit. But there was the funny cloud off east, still going lickety-split. Well, when Finley come ashore that night, the boys all gathered round, heard about the funny cloud out on the Abner ground. Well, they winked at one another, they grinned from ear to ear. And they said,
Well, good old thunderstorms, all we had round here. Old tornadiums and funny clouds, they happen where they can, but we ain't had one round here, not within the time of man. Out west where they happen, oh, we'll have a blow, a easterly or a thunder squall, but that's as far as we'll go. You're sitting there telling us that the Betsy Ann rolled over like a cop, and you mean to say she sunk once and then come up? Come on, Finley, what it is, you had a slug. Well, that must be dynamite you take in your water jug.
Finley sat and listened, getting pretty mad. A man being called a liar after the time he'd had. The Betsy Ann and I have been through a most uncommon gale. And she's wrapped up in that trawl line like a parcel in the mail. Well, damn you, don't believe me. Go on, blow out your old hot air. I suppose you think I clumb her mast and hung that hake up there? Explain that one.
How did you do that?
You figure.
Is that a fake hake? Come on, how'd you do that?
I'm telling you, the mast got trapped up in the trawl line.
Now.
Geez, don't go on.
That was your wonderful round of applause for your wonderful performance this evening. When I first asked these gentlemen to be the Evening with Ruth Moore, not just to be involved, but to do it, there was not a moment's hesitation from any of them. So we really appreciate it. Thank you very much to all three of you.